The night my husband introduced me as his assistant, I was holding the gift I'd spent 3 months planning for him. Not a tie, not a watch, not some last minute luxury nonsense bought by a woman trying to keep a marriage alive with shiny objects. I was holding the original leather portfolio from the first business pitch he had ever made, the one he used when he still believed in us more than an image. I had restored it myself, stitched the torn edge by hand, and tucked a note inside that simply said, "You never built this alone." I never got the chance to give it to him, because 20 minutes after I walked into that rooftop restaurant in Manhattan, wearing a dark green dress he once said made me look dangerously unforgettable, my husband smiled at a table full of investors and said, "And this is Lila. She keeps my schedule from falling apart. Honestly, I'd be lost without my assistant." His assistant. I still remember the exact sound of the laughter that followed. Polite, soft, expensive. The kind of laughter people give when they think they've been handed harmless information. I stood there with that portfolio in my hands and felt my entire body go cold. For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard him. But then, the woman beside him, a blonde venture partner with a diamond bracelet and the kind of smile that had never survived a sincere feeling in its life, looked me up and down and said, "Well, you clearly do more than scheduling. He's lucky to have such a polished team." Team. I looked at Ethan, my husband, 40 years old, celebrating his birthday with a private dinner on the top floor of a members-only club, all floor-to-ceiling windows and candlelight and a skyline glittering behind him like he personally owned the city. He adjusted his cufflinks, gave me a quick glance and said, "Lila, would you mind checking whether the dessert arrangements are set? I think they're bringing out the cake at 10. That was when I knew this was not a slip, not panic, not awkward phrasing. He had planned this. The room blurred at the edges, but I smiled anyway. That's the thing about humiliation. When it lands hard enough, sometimes your face becomes eerily calm because your pride understands that if it cracks in public, everyone wins. "Of course," I said evenly. Then I turned and walked away before anyone could see the way my hand was shaking. The hostess station was empty, so I stepped into the hallway near the restrooms and just stood there staring at my reflection in the dark glass. I'm Lila Warren. I'm 34 years old. And until that moment, I had spent 6 years believing my marriage had simply become complicated. Not fake, not strategic, not humiliating, just complicated. Ethan and I met when I was 26, in a co-working space downtown that smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. He was brilliant, charming, reckless in that seductive way certain men are before the world rewards them for it. I was a corporate attorney on my way out of a firm I hated, and he was a startup founder with one employee, no stable funding, and a pitch deck full of confidence. He used to come to me at midnight with ideas and half-baked product maps and ask, "Tell me if this is genius or a disaster." Usually it was both. I helped him anyway. At first it was love, then loyalty, then momentum. By the time his company, Veil and Stone, started getting real attention, I'd already done far more than any wife, or assistant, ever should have. I rewrote investor language. I cleaned up legal exposure. I connected him to two of the earliest strategic advisors through old firm contacts. I reviewed every partnership draft while still pretending I was just giving notes. And because Ethan insisted it would be temporary, I agreed to stay invisible. "Investors like a certain story," he told me once, standing barefoot in our kitchen while I annotated one of his term sheets. "Single founder, fully devoted, no distractions, no family complications. Once we close Series C, none of that will matter." I should have paid more attention to that sentence, not if. Not "I hate this too." Just, "Once we close Series C." That became his answer for everything. Why didn't he wear his ring to networking events? Because appearances were delicate. Why wasn't I invited to certain dinners? Because optics mattered. Why did I keep getting referred to vaguely as someone from the team whenever I crossed paths with people in his orbit? Because timing was important. And the worst part? I let myself rationalize it. Because when we were alone, he could still be the Ethan I fell in love with. The man who kissed my forehead while I worked. The man who ordered Thai food at 1 in the morning and said, "When this is all over, I'm taking you somewhere with no phones and no investors and no one saying my name like they own it." But success changes some people, and money doesn't reveal character nearly as much as status does. 3 months before that birthday dinner, I found the first thing that made my stomach drop: a draft agreement, buried in a folder Ethan had asked me to review. Not for the company, for him personally. A post-acquisition executive image strategy memo. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it until I got to page 4. There, in careful language polished by publicists and reputation consultants, was a recommendation that Ethan maintain the public perception of being unencumbered by domestic attachments until after the merger closed. Domestic attachments, that was me. My marriage reduced to a branding inconvenience. I confronted him that night. I was standing in our kitchen with the printed pages in my hand when he walked in. "What is this?" I asked. He loosened his tie, glanced at the papers, and actually sighed like I was exhausting him. "Lila, it's a strategy memo, not a blood oath. It says your image performs better with investors if you appear unattached. It says a lot of things. These firms say whatever maximizes value. And you're fine with that?" He set his keys on the counter. "For a few more months?" "Yes." I stared at him. "So I'm just supposed to disappear until it's convenient to acknowledge I exist?" He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Don't do this dramatic thing tonight." That sentence changed something in me. Not because it was cruel, because it was practiced. Like he'd already decided my pain was merely inconvenient timing. Still, I stayed. I wish I could tell you I left right then. I wish I could say I threw the papers in his face and walked out with perfect dignity. But real life is messier than that. Love, especially the kind built over years, doesn't die in one moment. It dies in layers, in denials, in tiny humiliations you keep trying to rename as temporary. So I stayed. And then came the birthday dinner. I was still standing near the hallway, trying to steady my breathing, when my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Where are you? Don't be difficult. Come back in. Don't be difficult." I looked at those words for a long time. Then another message came. "Also, when dessert comes out, sit near the end." Maya's taking photos for press? Maya, his PR director. The same woman who once smiled at me in our own apartment and said, "You're such a calming presence for him." Not wife, not partner. Presence. I should have walked out then. Instead, I went back in. Not because I forgave him, because something inside me had gone very still. And when a woman goes quiet after being humiliated, people often think she's broken. Sometimes she's just done gathering evidence. I returned to the table just as a server was pouring champagne. Ethan barely looked at me, only touched the back of my chair and murmured, "There you are." I sat at the far end like instructed. Then I noticed the seating cards. Everyone had a printed title: investor, managing partner, founder, board advisor. In front of me was a small ivory card that read, "Lila Warren, executive assistant." I picked it up between two fingers and turned it over. Blank. No apology, no explanation. Just a role. Assigned. Final. Across the table, Ethan was laughing at something one of the investors said. To anyone else, he looked dazzling, effortless, in control. But I knew where every fragile piece of that image was buried. And in my purse, resting beneath my lipstick and car keys, was the thing he had forgotten existed. The original company formation file, not a copy. The original. With one signature page Ethan had never properly read. I slid my thumb over the edge of my glass and looked down at that little card again. Executive assistant. Then I smiled. Because for the first time that night, I realized something that made my pulse slow instead of race. He thought he was embarrassing the woman who helped build his life. He had no idea he was humiliating the one person who could legally tear his future out from under him. And just as the candles on his birthday cake were lit, my phone buzzed with a message from someone I had not heard from in over a year. I didn't know Ethan was pretending not to be married now. Call me. You need to know what he filed last week. I stared at the screen. Then I slowly looked up at my husband. And suddenly, I knew this night was about to become much more than a public humiliation. It was about to become a war. The message stayed on my screen while the room applauded Ethan blowing out his candles. I didn't move, didn't react, didn't even blink. Because when your entire marriage has just cracked open in front of a table full of investors, the last thing you expect is someone casually texting you proof that it's about to get worse. Or better, depending on how you look at revenge. Across the table, Ethan finished his speech. I just want to thank everyone here tonight, he said smoothly, raising his glass. Vale and Stone is about to enter its most exciting phase yet. The merger next quarter will put us in a position to completely reshape the market. The investors nodded approvingly. Maya, his PR director, was already recording short clips on her phone for social media. I noticed something strange. In every frame she filmed, I was carefully out of view. Not blurred, not cropped by accident, positioned out of existence. I slowly locked my phone and placed it on the table. Then I leaned back in my chair and watched my husband celebrate the empire we built together as if I were an intern who accidentally wandered into the wrong dinner. And for the first time that night, I wasn't hurt. I was curious. Because whoever sent that message clearly knew something important. Something Ethan didn't want me to see. The dinner dragged on for another 40 minutes. Investors talked about projections. A venture partner discussed market positioning. Someone joked about Ethan becoming the most eligible bachelor in tech. That one almost made me laugh. Finally, people began standing, shaking hands, finishing champagne. Ethan stepped away with two investors near the windows overlooking the skyline. Perfect. I grabbed my purse and walked toward the balcony exit. The night air hit my face like cold water. The city stretched below, millions of lights, millions of strangers, and somewhere in that sea of people was the one person who had just sent me a message that might explain everything. I opened my phone again. The contact name made my stomach tighten. Daniel Price. Daniel had been Vale and Stone's first outside investor. But more importantly, Daniel used to be Ethan's mentor, until they had a very quiet, very ugly falling out 2 years ago. I stepped further down the balcony and tapped the call button. He answered on the second ring. Lila, he said. No hello, no small talk, just my name. You still recognize my number, I said. I recognize when someone finally stops ignoring obvious warning signs. I leaned against the railing. You're being dramatic. Am I? He replied calmly. Did he introduce you as his assistant tonight? Silence. My grip tightened around the phone. You're watching the dinner? I'm watching the entire strategy. That sentence sent a chill down my spine. What strategy? Daniel exhaled slowly. Tell me something first, he said. Did Ethan ask you to review any personal legal filings in the last 2 weeks? Yes. What kind? I hesitated. Then I answered. Merger paperwork, executive image positioning, some restructuring drafts. Daniel let out a quiet laugh. That's not what I asked. My pulse started climbing. Then what did you mean? His voice dropped slightly. Did you see the divorce filing? The world went silent. The sounds from inside the restaurant, the laughter, glasses, music, faded into something distant and unreal. What did you just say? I asked. Ethan filed a preliminary divorce petition 6 days ago. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. That's impossible. It's public record. He never... He never told you, Daniel finished. I stared at the skyline, trying to force my brain to process what he was saying. 6 days. 6 days ago, Ethan had filed for divorce. And tonight he introduced me as his assistant. Not his wife. Not his partner. His assistant. Because legally, in a few months, he planned for me to disappear entirely. You're lying, I said quietly. I wish I was. Why would he file without telling me? Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his tone was almost sympathetic. Because once the merger closes, Vale and Stone will be valued at just over $2 billion. I closed my eyes. And the divorce filing lists the company as a separate premarital asset. My eyes snapped open. What? He's claiming the company was established before your marriage and that you had no operational role. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. No operational role? I whispered. I warned him that argument wouldn't hold up. Daniel said calmly. But apparently he believes you won't fight him. I looked down at the city again. 6 years. 6 years of contracts, negotiations, investor calls, strategy drafts, sleepless nights. And Ethan had just erased all of it with one legal filing. Not just erased it. He planned to keep the entire company, the entire fortune, while leaving me with whatever settlement his lawyers decided was generous. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I saw the filing. And because I know something his lawyers apparently don't. My heart started beating slower now. Dangerously calm. What? Daniel spoke carefully. Who actually owns the intellectual property behind Vale and Stone's core software? I didn't answer. Because we both already knew. 3 years before the company exploded into the tech press, Ethan and I had spent an entire summer designing the algorithm architecture that made the product valuable. He wrote the prototype, but I rewrote the legal structure around it. Every patent, every licensing clause, every early filing. Because at the time, Ethan had been too busy pitching investors to care about technical ownership details. And I had been the attorney. I filed the original patents, I said quietly. Yes, Daniel replied. And whose name is on them? The wind moved across the balcony. I could hear Ethan laughing inside the restaurant again. To everyone else in that room, he looked unstoppable. Brilliant. Untouchable. But Daniel already knew the answer. And now I finally understood why he called. My name, I said. Exactly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel said something that changed the entire shape of the night. Lila, if Ethan thinks he can divorce you and keep the company, he paused. He has absolutely no idea what he just started. Inside the restaurant, someone called Ethan's name. I watched him turn toward the balcony doors, still smiling, still charming, still completely unaware that the woman he just humiliated in front of investors was holding the one piece of paper that could collapse his entire empire. Daniel spoke again. So the real question is this, he said quietly. Do you want a divorce? I thought about the place card. Executive assistant. I thought about the divorce filing. I thought about 6 years of work he had just tried to erase. Then I watched Ethan walking toward the balcony, drink in hand, confident that the night still belonged to him. Yes, I said. But not the kind he's expecting. Daniel chuckled softly. Good. Why? Because tomorrow morning, he said, his lawyers are going to discover something very interesting. What? The patents he built his company on? My fingers tightened around the phone. Yes? They're not licensed to Vale and Stone anymore. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Daniel's voice became almost amused. I mean, someone quietly transferred the licensing rights last week. A cold wave moved through my chest. Transferred them where? Daniel didn't hesitate. To a holding company. And who owns it? There was a long pause. Then he said 3 words that made the entire night tilt sideways. You do, Lila. Behind me, the balcony door slid open. Ethan stepped outside, and he looked annoyed. Lila, he said, everyone's waiting for you inside. I slowly turned toward him, phone still in my hand, heart suddenly beating in a completely different rhythm, because the man standing in front of me thought he had already taken everything. But he had no idea that tomorrow morning, he might wake up and discover he didn't actually own his company anymore. And for the first time all night, I smiled. Ethan stepped onto the balcony like he owned the entire skyline. For a moment, he didn't even notice my expression. He was still smiling, still glowing from the admiration inside the restaurant. To him, the night was perfect. Investors were impressed. The merger was moving forward, and his inconvenient wife had quietly stayed out of the spotlight exactly as planned. Why did you disappear? He asked, mildly irritated. Maya wants a few photos before people leave. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. Daniel had already hung up, which meant the next move was mine. I looked at Ethan for a long moment. 6 years of memories sat between us like invisible furniture. Late nights, shared dreams, arguments about strategy, the tiny apartment where Vale and Stone first existed as nothing more than an idea on a whiteboard. And now here we were, him standing in front of the empire we built, me holding the one thread that could unravel it. You introduced me as your assistant, I said calmly. Ethan sighed, not guilty, annoyed. Lila, don't start this tonight. Tonight seems like the appropriate night. Oh, he rubbed the bridge of his nose. This dinner was for investors. Optics matter. There's that word again, I said. Optics. His favorite excuse. He leaned against the railing beside me like this was a minor marital disagreement. We've talked about this. Once the merger closes, everything changes. I tilted my head. Everything? Yes. And what exactly changes? He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. That tiny pause told me everything Daniel had said was true. Ethan had already decided how this story would end. You'll be taken care of, he said carefully. I almost laughed. Taken care of. Like a problem. Like a former employee. Like a woman who hadn't helped him build the company he was about to sell for billions. You filed for divorce, I said. The silence that followed was fascinating. Ethan's entire body went still. Not shocked. Caught. His eyes searched my face. Who told you that? So it was true. Not even a denial. Just damage control. That's not important, I said. He straightened. Lila, you weren't supposed to see that yet. The arrogance of that sentence actually made me smile. Yet? It's a preliminary filing, he said quickly. My lawyers insisted we prepare it before the merger. Why? So things stay clean. Clean. He meant profitable. I watched him carefully. You told the court the company existed before our marriage. That's technically correct. You told them I had no operational role. That's legally safer. I stared at him. 6 years. And apparently my entire contribution to his success could be erased with 2 sentences and a confident lawyer. Ethan, I said quietly. Yes? You really should have read the formation documents more carefully. He frowned. What does that mean? I opened my purse, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out the original leather portfolio I had planned to give him. The gift. I placed it in his hands. For a moment, he looked confused. You brought me a present? Open it. He flipped the cover open. Inside was the old pitch deck from the very first investor meeting, the one he always said changed his life. Tucked behind the pages was the original patent filing He frowned as he read. Then his eyes froze. "What is this?" he asked. "You remember the summer we finalized the core architecture for Veil and Stone software?" "Of course." "You built the prototype." "Yes." "And I handled the legal structure." He looked up, slowly, suspicion starting to creep across his face. "Yes." I smiled. "And whose name did we file the patents under?" His face drained of color, because suddenly he remembered. Not Ethan Warren. Not Vale and Stone. Lila Warren. At the time, it had seemed harmless. Temporary. A technicality while the company structure was still being finalized. Something we would clean up later. But we never did. Because once investors started pouring money into the company, no one thought to question the original filings, including Ethan. "You signed the licensing agreement," I continued calmly. "That gave Vale and Stone permission to use the patents." His eyes were racing across the pages now. "You said it was standard paperwork." "It was. But licenses can expire." The air between us changed. He understood now. "Lila," he said slowly, "do you know when that license expired?" His voice was tight. "When?" "Last week." The silence that followed felt almost electric. "You're lying." "No. You can't revoke a license without notice." "Correct. And you didn't give notice." "I didn't have to." His breathing had changed. Shorter. Sharper. Because now he understood the real problem. "If the license expired," he said carefully, "Vale and Stone no longer has legal rights to the core software." "Exactly." His eyes snapped up to mine. "You wouldn't." I tilted my head. "Wouldn't what?" "Destroy the company." "Destroy it?" I repeated softly. "You already tried to erase me from it." Inside the restaurant, someone laughed loudly. The world continued as if nothing had changed. But Ethan's empire was now balanced on a legal technicality he had never bothered to read. "You're bluffing," he said. "I'm not." "You need that company too." "No," I said quietly. "I needed the marriage." That hit him harder than anything else. For the first time since stepping onto the balcony, Ethan looked afraid. "What do you want?" he asked. Now we were finally asking the right question. I leaned against the railing and looked out at the city again. "What I want," I said calmly, "is fairness." "You'll get a settlement." "No." "You'll get millions." "No." "Then what?" I turned back to him. "You're going to tell the truth." His jaw tightened. "About what?" "About who built Vale and Stone." "That's ridiculous." "You'll correct the divorce filing." He scoffed. "That's not happening." "And tomorrow morning," I continued calmly, "when your lawyers realize the company no longer has the right to use its own technology," I let the sentence hang. "The merger collapses." He stared at me. "You'd cost yourself billions." "I'd cost you billions." His hands clenched around the portfolio. "You're insane." "Maybe. Investors will sue you. They'll sue the company. And I still own the patents." The truth finally settled in. Ethan had built an empire on top of something he never legally owned, and the woman he had just publicly humiliated owned the foundation. "You planned this," he whispered. "No. I just stopped protecting you." Inside the restaurant, Maya appeared near the balcony door. "Ethan," she called. "Everyone's leaving." Neither of us moved, because in that moment, both of us understood something. The dinner, the humiliation, the divorce filing, all of it had been Ethan's attempt to quietly remove me from his story. But now the ending belonged to me. "So," I said softly, "what happens next?" He looked at the skyline, then back at me. For the first time since I met him 6 years ago, Ethan Warren looked like a man who had finally realized he wasn't in control. and the next words out of his mouth would decide everything. But whether he chose pride or survival, one thing was already certain. The woman he had introduced as his assistant was the only person in the world who could save his company or destroy it. And this time, I wasn't going to stay invisible.